Hello, I'm Pato, and this is going to be a list of media consumed in January. It's not everything. I went really overboard in every department, so many movies and books and music this month. In my defense, it's January, and one of my New Year's resolutions is to read every book ever written, so I'm a little behind. Um, Up first, the first thing I want to talk about is one of my new favorite super formative movies I've seen, Grey Gardens, a documentary by the Maisels brothers. I gave this 5 stars, and I have only done that 7 times total. It is going into my personal canon in terms of what moves me and inspires me and feels so specific to what I'm trying to do. Or I just felt like it showed me an intersection of so many different things and interests I've had across things I've seen all in one package. And the filmmaking itself just felt super accessible, but also impressive. And I came away from it as soon as it ended looking up cameras secondhand online or available to rent because I immediately wanted to have something in my hands and be making blank, which is a huge compliment in my eyes, at least, of feeling that inspired by something that you want to act on it immediately. The content itself, it's a fly on the wall documentary about these two women who live in a foreclosed house together, their mother and daughter, and showcasing the relationship that they have. It's a very unbiased documentary. There's no narration, there's no sort of point of view being enforced. The filmmakers don't speak, but the women themselves do acknowledge the filmmakers, or more namely, the presence of a camera. And the way that they both choose to interact with it, I find really interesting in a meta sense in terms of what performance can look like and how the mother might treat it as a confessional while the daughter treats it as a stage or a chance to talk to people past the lens and get certain things off her chest, or it sparks and incentivizes these arguments that bring sort of long held resentments against each other, and how them staying together through the love that they do share has also this flip side of a building resentment that they denied each other the life that they feel they deserve, and they both express it in pointed and strange ways. They are in some ways pitiable, I guess you could say. They live in a foreclosed sort of hoarder house, and at one point the mother's bedridden and they eat cat food together. It sounds funny on paper, but it's also really kind of tragic, although the way it's handled and portrayed feels very empathetic towards them, and that sort of glimmer and celebratory aspect really keeps this from being something perverse into something weirdly inspiring and beautiful. Again, was super moved by it. Yeah, really loved it. Another documentary I watched last month is Black Roots by, oh, I forgot their name, Eric something. But it is a sort of mixed media approach to capturing these stories of a bunch of different blues and folk singers or political activists and their relationship to racism through a lens mostly of blues and folk music, whether that's performances or I'm trying to explain it. Okay, so there are certain elements where it's set at a table and a bunch of singers and performers are around it and they just have a conversation and it's captured. The conversation itself being inherently political or about race overtly. And then that is interspersed with these talking heads from these political figures that are very centered about race or their upbringing. And it all is sort of tied together through the musical performances that go on. And towards the tail end, there's this one element that before I get ahead of myself, my brain's going like a mile a minute. But the the footage itself and the through line of the blues reminds me a lot of Les Blank, another documentary filmmaker, namely because he has a documentary that I really love that is also centered around the blues according to Lightning Hopkins. And so there's an immediate parallel there in the fact that they're both sort of celebrating and capturing this Black life through the lens of the music that is inherent to it. And then there's also this element of D.A. Pennebaker, who is a music based documentary maker. He recorded this one piece that I really love, the Monterey Pop Festival in like the 60s or something. I don't know the exact date off top, but there's a performance by Otis Redding. It's also its own standalone thing. It's called Shake, but I really love it. And the last song in the Otis Redding performance, most of it is just footage from the stage, but for that song, it intersperses crowd footage from throughout the entire festival, not during the song itself, but just the couples and the people and the children and the sort of natural performances of the crowd throughout the whole weekend. And it's just a really beautiful and sort of capturing the people themselves while the song is going crazy in the background. And in Black Roots, the sort of musical performances that tie everything together towards the tail end of the documentary, the visuals pull out and it starts interspersing just footage of Black life and Black people on the streets of New York in a sort of portraiture, very intimate lens. Not all of them are sort of filmed directly. It's just like them in passing, them leaving, coming to work, or in front of their school, children at play, or some people close up in like a portraiture. But that, with the blues performances in the background, felt very Pennebaker-esque. But the footage itself that was interspersed felt very Les Blank-esque in the way that he also will film people on the sidewalk and sort of treats the sidewalk as a stage. I just really love the intersection of both. It's also its own thing, but yeah, very reminiscent of things that I've already liked. So I came away from it really enjoying it. Another Les Blank documentary that I watched was Gap-Toothed Woman, which is about exactly that, these sort of talking head interviews of a random assortment of women with gap teeth. They all offer their different perspectives on beauty standards and show a little peek into their own lives, which are all eclectic in their own ways, and they have very differing sort of backgrounds. It's just like one of those oddity documentaries where you're getting a really close look at a niche or the subgroup or like a very specific topic. At one point, one of the women interviewed goes belly dancing, and that's like a central sort of takeaway that I have of the documentary. It's a little random, eclectic, but really charming. Out of documentaries into just feature films, Monster by Koreeda, my first Koreeda movie, and I really loved it. I'll try to go faster. I'm realizing I'm spending a lot of time on each thing, and this is a very long list. Okay, so it's very meta in the sense of being self-aware of the perspective that you impose by making a movie, period. And it plays with that sort of limited perspective, limited knowledge of the audience in building this mystery in 3 acts, which are all the same act, but following the perspective of a different character involved in it. And each time you just see more and more of the bigger picture. And outside of it being like, oh, perspective, the movie or whatever, it is also just a really clever sort of, there's a motif of emotional angst and turmoil and guilt and repression. There's also queer undertones throughout, but it just reframes itself so often, and every single time. There's never a point where, like, at the beginning, before you have this other information, it feels weak. Everything feels so standalone, but it just keeps iterating on itself, not necessarily improving on itself. And I think that's another really big strength of the movie, that it's super good and feels smart consistently, but there is just this sort of mounting emotional heft to it that hits like a huge release valve that is also very meta and playful in how it involves the score, and it brought me to tears. The score itself being by Ryuichi Sakamoto, and really amazing. Another movie that is coming of age is Bird. I don't remember who the filmmaker is, but coming of age movie. I liked it a lot. I felt that it was tender and sort of showcases a very heavy, tumultuous family life, and this girl being at odds between finding herself amidst all of the sort of wreckage of these two homes that she's finding herself floating back and forth to. There's also this sort of adult supporting lead in Franz Rogowski, who as an actor I was unaware of, but blew me away in this movie. There's some surreal flourishes that are unexpected but work and are very memorable. Overall, I really liked the movie, but I came away from it being super impressed by Franz Rogowski. So much so, I watched another movie with him in it called Great Freedom and really loved it. Super different tonally. This one is a prison drama that is also centered around queer love, about a man sort of told in a triptych, 3 different prison stints that he has of being imprisoned for practicing homosexuality in an age where it's outlawed, in like the 1940s, coming off of the back end of concentration camps and then going into the prison system. You see how he has been warped and sort of misshapen and led to believe he doesn't belong, and the sort of acts of resistance that he takes upon himself in reminding himself that he is worth loving. And yeah, it's really emotionally charged and also very tense and cold and clinical in the sort of prison procedural way that felt very reminiscent of A Man Escaped, which segue, bringing me to the first book I'll start talking about, which is Bresson on Bresson, an interview collection of the movies that he's directed. Really liking it. I picked it up not because of the Man Escaped connection, but because I watched another movie, Certified Copy by Kiarostami, which I did not like. But I went to pick up my Kiarostami interview collection to see what he had to say for himself about such a dire miss. And then I saw that next to it and picked it up. Another book that I read last month is Jesus' Son by Dennis Johnson. Huge unexpected surprise, I guess. I loved this book so much so that I ended up using annotation thingies for like the first time ever. Partly as like a novelty, and partly because it's not my book. My friend lent it to me, so I didn't want to write in it, but I still wanted to sort of capture like the lines themselves, because on a sentence level, love it. This is a short story collection that is surreal and strange and drug-addled and featuring narrators that are at times beyond redemption, it seems. It'll alternate. I don't know. It takes place in bars, in random parking lots, and back seats, and apartments, and I think it's like a sanatorium or a hospital or something. But I really loved it. It felt super memorable and new and exciting, and yeah, I ate it up, and I came away from it being so impressed by the book that I'd wanted more by the author. So I ended up buying some books for the first time in a while by Dennis Johnson, which hopefully I can find. Here's one. This is a pile of new books. So yeah, I got 3 books by Dennis Johnson. First being Angels, which I'll come back to in a second. That was his first novel. Then I got another short story collection, The Largesse of the Sea Maiden. This one came out only a few years ago, shortly before he passed away. And then this is a sort of anthology collection of his poetry, The Throne of the Third Heaven of the Nation's Millennium General Assembly. Well, we'll see. But yeah, the 3 different sort of directions of novel instead, more short story, poetry. You'll see if it holds up. This book has a bit of a cult sort of following, and in trying to find another book of his to read, it's much less straightforward. I had to look online for sort of recommendations, and while I found this list by David Foster Wallace of 5 of like the most important or greatest American novels, American contemporary literature or something. He made a list of like his 5 favorite books or whatever, and this was one of them, which I thought was a cool coincidence because at the moment I'm also reading The Pale King by David Foster Wallace and really liking it. So coming off of this and then being in the middle of the other and seeing that there was like a bridge and that they were sort of in conversation as authors, I thought was really cool. And so I started going through the other books in the list of that the Wallace made, and I got them as well. First being Omen Sutter's Luck, which I don't know much about any of them. I kind of just blind faith went into them, and I don't expect to like all of them, but I do expect to like at least one of them that is new to me. One of these 3, I mean, because I already expect to like the Dennis Johnson one. But this one came with a little note. I got them all secondhand, so it says, in lieu of flying corn merchandise, here's a piece of rural goodness that's sure to remind you of dusty old Kansas. Parentheses, gas is one of my faves. So very cute, whoever owned that before. Then it is Wittgenstein's Mistress. I'm realizing the text is backwards. It says, in the beginning, sometimes I left messages in the street. This one I think is supposed to be like heady or like postmodern or some adjective. We'll see. This one I already started, but Jerzy Kaczynski's Steps. I struggled to read that backwards. Really cute as an object, but looks can be deceiving because 25 pages in, and this is already intensely perverted and really intense. Super small, not only like in size, but it's a skinny book. It's only 100-something pages, and the blurb on the back is glazing like crazy. It says, one of the most remarkable novels in English. What the hell? And that's by the New York Times Book Review. We'll see about that. But that is some additions. Like I said, I already started that one. I'm in the middle of a couple of these books. But another cool connection is, the text is backwards and I can better read it, but on the short story collection, it's blurred by a bunch of authors, one of which being George Saunders. And I just read this by George Saunders, another short story collection. This is called Civil War Land in Bad Decline. And I like this less than Jesus' Son. It was the same friend who let me both, and one more that I'll talk about, or maybe another one that I'll talk about. They let me a bunch of books, and I then we like traded. But this is a short story collection which is sort of surreal and elevated in a kind of sci-fi way, but I wouldn't call this like a sci-fi book. It is more of like just an exaggerated, kind of dystopian, I guess, where they're not all set in the same setting, but just sort of advanced technology which highlights and sort of exaggerates negative aspects of humanity. It is kind of like, not pessimistic, I guess a little pessimistic or like nihilistic in that sense, but there is some levity in it, like there's humor injected, although not all of it lands. One of the stories I actively disliked so much, I finished it and I was waiting for like some redeeming thing and there just was nothing, and I was like, ooh, that is a rough miss. So much so that there's a novella of the second half of this book that I just completely skipped. Also, I have just gotten addicted to using these like tab things. I really like them. So I wouldn't say I like the book as much as this sort of demonstrates, but I'm highlighting everything. I'm having fun. The author's notes at the very end kind of redeemed a lot of this, just because you see his personality on display outside of like the guise of, like the layer of fiction, and it comes across as really endearing and sincere and romantic, highlighting like him and his home life and the way that he would sort of steal time at work to pluck away at this and have his wife be involved, and how much he looked forward to it as like a form of escape and his first big writing project. Yeah, and it just sort of recolored it in like a more positive light. Yeah, really cute. Also, just recolored my view on him because I only knew him from that one, or not angry. What is it called? I forget what it's called. The book that's like how to read Russian literature short stories. But I imagined him as like a grouchy old man with a huge mustache, and it turns out he's just a normal, awkward guy, for better or for worse. Oh, and then this is another book that that same friend lent to me. They're very into short stories, and I lent them like a Raymond Carver one. Hopefully they like it. But Flannery O'Connor short stories, a name I was familiar with, but I had never read. American classic, like American Gothic stuff, doesn't appeal to me on paper, but I was proven really pleasantly surprised because this is so good. There's a bunch of levity and absurdity, but also like scathing slash darkness injected into the depictions of good old country people. That's the name of the first story that I read. And the language itself was very dense and difficult, and not in like a super off-putting way, but in a, oh, like I have to think actively, which in some like contemporary fiction especially like isn't always the case. You can kind of just ease into like the rhythm of the story, but this was like out the gate I was like, what is being described and what is happening? But yeah, I was really into it, and it definitely warrants exploration. I already read one of them twice and really liked it the second time around. But I've just been kind of plucking away, chugging through it. I'm not done with the entire book. I am on page 334, so I have a little, like the second half to go. But everything I've read has been good, consistently, without checking. Some highlights have been Enoch and the Gorilla. The River is another good one. Good Country People, the first one I read was really good. Oh no, I'm blanking on names, but anyways, I'm really enjoying it. Yeah, which isn't like a unpopular opinion or anything. She's a very revered writer, very celebrated, and I'm just late to the party, but really enjoying it. One takeaway that I'm having that I'm really happy about is that I'm not well read when it comes to short stories, and so reading these things that are very extreme or like go in very different directions than what I'm used to has been really fun, because I use Raymond Carver as like a goalpost for everything because he's so formative and someone I like a lot. So everything is kind of just in relation to him, and reading these has shown me in like a broader perspective, and I'm really happy about it. Probably also why I'm liking them, or have liked them so much, and I'm getting so much out of them, like annotation wise, but I'm not complaining. I'm really loving them. Rough transition, but here's some more movies. Oh, here's a transition for you. There is a biopic movie based on Flannery O'Connor that came out last year. I think it just got put on Criterion or something. It's called Wildcat, and it has Maya Hawke as Flannery O'Connor, and is directed by Ethan Hawke. Could not name a movie I want to watch less. Here are some movies that I watched instead. Challengers, which ended up being maybe my favorite Luca Guadagnino movie, which I'm really surprised by, but I had pretty low expectations. I didn't expect to have it be my favorite, but it is so passionate and just propulsive and playful, and the power play, and it's so sexy and blah blah blah. I was just on board the whole time, and I loved it. I love how like it transcended what it was about and was just like about expression and passion and drive. Oh, I was so on board, and like yeah, the score was also really great. A movie that is polar opposite, Happiness by Tom something. I don't know what his name is. I watched this purely because of Philip Seymour Hoffman. I really love him as an actor, and so I'm trying to do like a completion of his filmography. This movie is not on a streaming service, or at least not one that I have. So I got it from the library. Nothing prepared me for what that movie was. Crazy. A close comparison would be The Strange Thing About the Johnsons, the Ari Aster short about like the incestuous reverse power dynamic between a son and his father, where it's like really twisted and gnarly, and just like immediately at the gate you're like, oh no, like this movie's not gonna be fun. I had that with this, where it is crazy. It's like this large scale, sort of like interconnected stories, but something bad is just happening to everyone, and it just cuts between them and like takes turns and like uncomfortable scenario after uncomfortable scenario. Ugh, it is. It actually kind of reminds me of another movie uh, that's on the list in a second, but yeah, I was not ready. It was so bad, like in a good way, but going in blind was a crazy experience. I was disgusted and also like so I don't know. I don't know. A movie that was much um, less whatever rough transition, whatever. I need to stop talking about happiness though. Sean Baker's Prince of Broadway. I love Sean Baker, and I think I liked this movie as much as I liked Anora. Now, does that mean that I liked Anora and I thought this movie was also good, or did I not really like Anora that much? And the same goes for this movie. I'll leave it ambiguous, um, but I do love Sean Baker, and I've been trying to finish all of his movies, and I think I still have one left, the one with like Hemingway's daughter or something. I have that, and I have Red Rocket that I need to watch still. Another movie is Safe by Todd Haynes, which has crept up on me in terms of how much I like it. And in the moment, I wasn't super on board, but coming away from it, realizing how understated and intentionally ambiguous it is, leaving room for thought and having it ultimately be subjective and on the audience to decide whether or not they believe her as well, I found really smart, even if it is sort of obvious or like on the nose. I The more I think about it, I just can't decide what the better scenario is. It's essentially a movie about, not to give the plot away or anything, but it's essentially a movie about a woman requesting more and more intense medical treatment for a condition that people around her sort of struggle to believe or something. And so you're meant to be like wondering, it is just all sort of ambiguous. It's either she's crazy and it's all in her head and poor her, and oh my god, the limits and like ways, the lengths that we go to destroy ourselves when we don't need to, and like to create distance where it's not necessary, or the opposite is true where she needs help and she's being surrounded by people who refuse to give it to her. Both of them are sort of equally terrifying because the ending, the last 10 seconds of this movie are so haunting and left me, whoa, yeah, whoa, is all I can say about it. Both options are horrible, and yeah, the more I think about it, the more I'm like, this was actually a really good movie. After the fact, maybe on a rewatch, like with that in mind, it would be even better. But it functions as a really good allegory for a bunch of sort of communities that are ostracized at the time, obviously, like as an AIDS metaphor, but also just like as suburban malaise, or like as like queerness as being othered, as well as just like a literal sense of women's medical issues being treated as psychosomatic. Yeah, really clever movie, ultimately, even though in the moment I didn't think it was. And then this is the movie I kind of compared to Happiness, but World of Glory, a short film by Roy Anderson, which is so like colorless and bleak and uncomfortable. It's really impressive to me. I love his stuff as much as you can love his stuff because it's intentionally sort of made to be uncomfortable and unpleasant. But I'm really impressed by him as a director in terms of what he's able to convey in terms of tone without ever moving his camera and through having very literal performances where it is just a single frame composed, one unbroken take of an actor deadpan delivering to camera, and somehow still is like toe curling. I find it really impressive. And the opening shot of this movie, one of like the most affronting across everything that I've seen of his. It's crazy. It's a rough 15 minutes. And then another movie that I liked was Read My Lips, which is this sort of pacey, sexy Euro thriller about an ex-con who meets up with this deaf woman, and they sort of force this relationship, will they, won't they? But then also he has his eyes on the prize and wants to do a heist and use her to like read the lips of people involved to like steal secrets or something. I don't know. It was fun. I really liked it. It was kind of chaotic and frenetic, and the way it was shot was really close up, and like the use of with the focus on hands also felt Bressonian in a sense. Maybe that's why I picked up the interview thing. I don't know. But it's by Jacques Audiard, which I thought was really funny because after finishing the movie, I was like, that was great. I wonder who it's by. And then I recognized his name as the director of Emilia Perez, who has been in hot water lately, like the Oscar sphere, because I haven't seen it, but apparently that movie is problematic in a lot of ways, allegedly. So I apologize for being like, this guy's movies rock. But I did really like that movie. I haven't seen Emilia Perez though, so God bless y'all, and I hope it loses. Music wise, it's been a crazy month. I started making music for like the first time, and I've just been consuming nonstop. I don't know, it's changed a lot. I already loved music, but now like I just can't get enough. So I make a playlist every month of the stuff that I like, and I've made 3 for January just because I keep running out of space and like can't shuffle them cleanly. So yeah, I have 3. There's easily over 250 songs that I found this month. Some highlights are Piss Factory by Patti Smith, which is this very overtly political and sort of spoken word, poetic, dense song with this like mounting and building piano backdrop, which is sort of syncopated but also really melodic. But also really melodic. There are some elements like lilts that she puts on certain lines that reminded me of Lizzie Mercier Desclous. But also I just hadn't heard the song ever before, and I just kept putting it on repeat. Yeah, I couldn't get enough of it. Another song that I listened to a bunch was Funkier Than a Mosquito's Tweeter by Nina Simone, which is like a very groovy drum-backed song, but her vocal performance is so emphatic and energetic that I can see it. I haven't seen footage of the concert, but when I listen to that song, I can see her on stage. There's one part in particular where she kind of leads into her next line by starting like a high note a measure early and just sustaining it, and then when it gets to the point that she's meant to sing, she drops it and like in a growl like rises right back up to where she was, and I can just like envision her like spinning in a circle, like her arms out, like she is on fire in that song. And yeah, it's so good. A band I've been listening to a bunch of is Public Image. Another band is Popol Vuh, which is like this Nordic something band that has done the soundtracks for a bunch of Werner Herzog movies. But their earlier output has also been really cool. They do progressive krautrocky stuff that's psychedelic, but also includes a lot of like orchestral elements. Really unique. The song Take It With You by Cameron Winter, one of my favorites as a single. Been getting so much mileage out of it, and I find it really inspiring. The compositions of Julius Eastman, really interesting life that he has. He studied, these are like sort of classical compositions made for piano. and they're all pretty long. They're like 30 minutes ish long. He has another collection called like Feminine, or Feminine, I guess. And there's two different ones. I've been listening to that a lot as well. But he's kind of most well known for this series of very provocatively titled tracks that he made. His history itself, he was like in academia and in like the sort of whatever composer school people go to, like these music schools. And he was a black gay man. And as he incorporated aspects of his queerness into his music, much to the chagrin of some other composer dude. He's like a famous guy as well. I'm forgetting his name, but some like established music guy as well. It was like his teacher or something, and he was not rocking with that at all. So he ended up getting kicked out of like the academy, and then from there, his music was never really recognized in its time. He eventually became homeless, and he died without ever sort of receiving recognition. And a lot of his compositions have been found posthumously and incorporated into a lot of modern performances. And so there have been a lot of renditions of his music, and it's sort of gotten this second wind or like a life after the fact. I find it really moving, not inspiring because it's not a positive story at all, but listening to the music, yeah, it's just very evocative. I've been listening to it a bunch though. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. He has a really interesting life. I'm not sure if I'm remembering correctly if there is or isn't a documentary on his life, but I'd be interested to know more about him. The compilation album Hey Drag City from the early 90s has some really cool singles on it from Silver Jews, from Pavement, and from Gaster del Sol or something. All really cool. I've been listening to it quite a bit. Some newer releases. Voice Actor came out with an album that is really cool. And then there have been two African American sound recordings albums, which is like a side project of Cities Aviv. Sort of a similar vein of sort of glitchy, strange, ambient-ish music that interpolates really weird sounds to begin with, and has a lot of vocal splices or beat loops. It's all instrumental for the most part. I haven't listened to the second one. It came out only a few days ago, and they're both really long. Like I think they each have like 20 songs or something on them. But the first one was really cool. My favorite thing that's come out so far this month has been an EP by a band called Glint. Really like it. It's sort of minimal and little experimental ambient music, electronic ambient music. Don't know how to categorize it, but I'm really drawn to it. I don't know. It's like exactly what I'm trying to make, or like elements that I'm drawn to acted on, kind of like Ray Gardens, like in a way that seems accessible and inspiring and makes me just want to go and play on my MIDI. There's a song by, it's getting kind of tangential, but there's a song by Great Area called Light Decline that starts in a really unique way that when I heard it, whenever it came out, I think like a month or so ago, I was really inspired by it and I wanted to act on it in some way, but couldn't really figure out how. And I tried, but it was like a sort of messy attempt. There's a song that Glint has that has the same sort of syncopated, like start-stop approach, where instead of in like traditional ambient having like these rising, swelling pads that stay like consistently and sort of wax and wane in and out, it like goes through a gate or like a filter and just immediately cuts off over and over again. So it's like this like riser and then it cuts, and like the empty space is just as intentional as the sound itself. I wish that I could, act on it. But yeah, seeing it played out, that song in particular, I think it's called 2x2. Have been coming back to it a lot, but the whole EP I think is really cool and just very in line with what I want to listen to and make. Another compilation album that I thought was really neat was one called Pinball Rock. Just a bunch of rock songs that are all centered around pinball in some way. The song Pinball Machine by the band Country Teasers is the one I've come back to the most. Really love that song and how blown out and weird and distorted it gets. I also just love sort of niche stuff like that. Same with the sort of like Les Blank Gap-Toothed Woman documentary, just like a peek into such like a strange subculture, like specific exploration. And then lastly is the OK Lou EP. There was a single that featured Blade, Take Me by the Hand, and then the song with underscores, Harvest Sky. Both really cool. Okay, some more stuff last minute to throw in there. My entire desk is covered in books. Okay, this is definitely something I need to address. Rejection. I'm not doing this for effect. I don't even know what to say about this book. Admitting that you finished it is a red flag in itself, but it appeared on a bunch of favorites of the year lists of my so-called friends, which after reading the book and trusting them, I'm looking at them differently, that's for sure. It is super perverse and dark in the same way that like Happiness is, where it's like we're dealing with some interesting thematic choices. There's a lot of sexual deviancy in the book. It was sort of sold to me in a way that made it seem normal, as a short story collection with a through line of rejection, interconnected characters. It is not that. It's barely even interconnected. I feel like that is definitely oversold. Where the stories function independently. There's some names that reoccur, but it does not. They're not like in conversation really. As stories, they do kind of up in intensity, or like how exaggerated they are. I don't know. It is like secondhand embarrassment inducing and chronically online and very in the know of like a bunch of different subcultures to like the it's like it crosses a line of not only being like secondhand embarrassing, but like painful, like physically painful. One of the stories in this that involves an email made my stomach hurt so bad I had to stop reading the book. It is rough. Like I was convulsing and like thrashing around. It's unlike anything I've read, for better and for worse. Very memorable. Reliant on shock value to its detriment. Also overly intellectual to its detriment. Because so much of it is steeped in these online subcultures, there's a ton of identity politics going on. Sometimes poking fun at, but also sometimes exploring it in earnest. And the author themselves comes across as very intelligent, but then also seems very aware of the shortcomings of what he's written, and includes these sort of meta elements towards the end that criticize the book as like a fake publisher, or even include him as an author as part of the story before it. It just gets weird and meta, in a way that's kind of just off-putting and unnecessary, especially because they're at the tail end of the book. I feel like I already read so much of it. Like I'm obviously on board. I made it through some gruesome and like insane acts of violence socially against yourself or like the people in these stories being so bad. That like I'm obviously on board with whatever's happening. I don't need for you to like blow the whistle and come in and criticize and point out actually why the book was bad actually and why everything is, I don't know, as like a meta thing. I think it's meant for you to dislike it maybe, and that way it's like this full circle thing of like, and then you the reader rejected me. But that's how it comes across, is like whatever that voice implies is like stupid and like self-aggrandizing. Yeah, doesn't stick the landing so much, but there are some high highs or low lows, I guess, in whatever way you want to look at it, that I will never forget. To my own detriment, I am unable to forget them. Yeah. What else? This is a book that I don't really have much to say, but Henry Dukeman and His Shadows, it was fine. I had tried reading it before, revisited it, didn't really get that much out of it. It's tonal, it's nocturnal, it's pleasant, but it's not doing anything too crazy. Almost didn't finish it. Speaking of books, finishing them, Either or by Elif Batuman. I'm almost done. I have like 50 pages left. I'm about to finish this one. Have liked The Ride, but I've enjoyed it less than The Idiot. Although I'm glad or happy that I don't know what the word is, but I think it's a good thing that they tried to do something different and didn't just stay in the same sort of pigeonhole, although it didn't really work or land the same way for me. Still liked the book. Obviously, it's not done, so maybe it'll end on some, really elevated thing. But yeah, it was good. Nowhere near like the same level that it reached for me, which I think also works to characterize Celine more. That she has changed and her priorities change, and I think I was just more aligned with her freshman self than her sophomore showing. Another book I read or have started is Fat City. Barely in this start of this, but one thing that's backwards, but introduced by Dennis Johnson, the aforementioned author. Just thought it was a cool connection. And in the introduction, he says that everything he's ever written is an imitation of that book, which is high praise. And so if I liked the sort of copy, I'll probably like the original as well. It's an unrelated connection. That's a library book, so I just got the hold recently. But I put it in before I knew who Dennis Johnson was. So it's cool to see like how interconnected things are even behind the scenes. Crush by Richard Seikin. This one closest to my bed because I've been reading one poem before going to sleep every night. Liked it. I've barely started the routine, so I'm on poem number 3, or will be tonight. But I like them. I'm not really well versed in poetry. Haven't read too much, but this is definitely on like the upper echelon so far, although it's a really small sample size. Another one that the same friend, gave to me. So yeah, really happy to have books that are sort of outside of my purview, just being placed in my lap, and enjoying them. And yeah, it's exciting. And then 2 books that when I made this list, I forgot I read kind of. One I did like, so I feel bad that I forgot, and the other I think just speaks to like how much of a miss I think it was for me. The first being Liars by Sarah Manguso. But didn't really like this book. Heard some buzz from some friends on here and was willing to give it a shot. It's sort of recounting a toxic relationship in a way that is a bit too one-dimensional for me. It's just about a woman talking about this man who she should not be with, and she knows it from the start, or is telling you from the start how bad everything is. And because there's no sort of happy honeymoony period, really, the entire thing just feels constantly negative and one-dimensional in that sense, where he is purely sort of portrayed and characterized through his shortcomings and his sort of outbursts of evil and abuse. And because of that, it just isn't really that compassionate of a story, or at least there are like limits to like how sympathetic you can feel, just because she as a narrator and like as a participant in the relationship seems so complacent, which initially is fine, like makes sense, but it's over the course of like 14 or something years. And so reading for that long of her saying consistently, I shouldn't be here, it's like, girl, we get it, you should not be there, like, you are, get out. It just makes for a really frustrating experience, and just like nails in the same point over and over. And it's like, girl, you said that on page 1, like, I understand. Let's get a move on. It's also very like white space-y, and so I don't know, something about like the form and like the characterization itself, underwhelming. Able to read it compulsively, but I forgot up until today when I was like, what have I read? Yeah, I didn't. I immediately threw that one away. And then Beautyland by, I think her name is Helen something. I'm probably wrong on that. I really liked the first half of this book. The second half was not for me, I don't think. But this falls into the sort of autistic girl headcanon, where this kid growing up feels so like out of place that they assume or sort of cope by convincing themselves that they are not of this world. So in the same sort of sphere as books like Earthlings by Sayaka Murata or The Seas by Samantha Hunt. Um, in this book, it's about a girl who believes that she is an alien and that her job is to report on what humanity is like to her superiors. She does this through a fax machine, so she sort of sends these vignette little prose pieces, things, or like musings on life throughout the entire book. And it follows her from childhood to like 18 for like half the book, and then the second half, the pace sort of doubles and follows her from like 18 to like 60 or something. It just moves way, way, way faster, but it was also way less compelling. Like the stakes and like everything are very front loaded, and so I really enjoyed sort of growing up alongside her, and like I was really into it, of her living with this single mother in this sort of lower middle class household, and the way that she's interpreting the world in a really unique way, and the sort of wonder that she has while also feeling out of place, the coming of age, blah blah blah. I really liked it. And then her sort of adulthood chapters and phases felt, I don't know, just less for me, I guess. It started feeling a little trite and weird, where those little I don't want to give anything away, I guess, but it, yeah, I can't talk about it without spoiling it. It just sort of devolves into like, and then everyone clapped territory, or like kind of broad strokes conflicts. There were some like glimpses of like minutia, or like, I don't know. The first half was good. The second half, not so much. Did not land, or did not stick the landing for me, at least. But that's it. There are more books on my desk. I have a bunch of like library books out and like just random. I'm not gonna. That's enough. And scene. I think it was also, or I meant to do like ins and outs for the month. It's whatever. What is in is it being whatever. Yeah, that is some of the highlights of what I consumed this month. Been a long time, I think, since I did like a monthly wrap up thing. Looking at how long this video is, I can see why. But yeah, especially with how much I consumed. I know there's more, and I'm like forgetting something that I really liked. What I don't know. That seems like a good sort of synopsis or checking in point of what is on my radar, what I'm in the middle of, what I finished, and I will come back at a later date to tell you what I thought about some of the same things, maybe some new stuff. We'll see. Yeah, I don't know what's next. I just uploaded the other day like one of the mixes that I put on my website normally. So like the gloves are off, and I'm kind of open to just putting whatever on here. So we'll see. But bye. Thanks for watching.